Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Chu, and I'm joined here by Bill Vertine. And we are doing the next Skype for Business broadcast, and it's on every other Friday. And today, we're really excited because we're going to be talking about the next major version of the Cloud Connector Edition. And so before we get started, just some housekeeping items. Bing Pulse is open. And in fact, we have a few people that are going to be answering your Bing Pulse live as we go forward. And so do ask those questions. And we have so much content here today, Bill, that we're just going to go straight through and try to get all the content covered in today's session. So do ask your question on the Bing Pulse, and we'll definitely get an answer to you as this session is going live. And so with that, let's get started with Bill. Can you please just tell everyone your name and what you do here at Microsoft?
Sure. I'm Bill Vertine. I've been in the Skype for Business, Link, whatever product name we had through the years, division for 10 years. And I'm currently the product owner for Hybrid PSTN, which is essentially on-premise PSTN tying into our cloud PBX. So I will push ahead here into the slide deck and talk about our 2.0 release, which has been talked about for some time. We've probably hinted at it for almost a year. And we're ready to deliver at least the first bunch of version 2 features. And so there's a long list here of stuff that we're going to go through. But essentially, you can see here on your screen, we have the big one is the first one, right, which is media bypass. And I'll go into that in some depth. I have a future slide on that. But what it is, why you need it, and how useful it is, and what it's going to do for you, and some of the limitations and some of the quirks of it. We also have expanded the size of the CC sites. We used to support 4 CCs per site. And site is a logical construct. When I say site, it's not a physical construct. You can have as many CC sites in a physical site. There's no limit, but there is a limit to how many CCs can be bundled into one collective site. And so now we've increased that from 4 to 16. And that has some repercussions on high availability and stuff like that in a positive way. We're also able to manipulate SIP headers now, which allow you to kind of better inject data into the SIP header, so your billing is easier to do, or your tracking or your reporting. So that's a new feature. We also have improved the administrative roles, and we'll talk about that as far as what type of permissions you need to be the administrator of CCE. We also added the ability to flag call data specifically as hybrid, so that in your kind of offline reporting, you can analyze like your hybrid performance versus your non-hybrid PSTN performance, or your PSTN calling performance, the Microsoft PSTN service. So you can have both of them and people on both, and you can now separate out the calls and actually analyze them separately, because we're able to flag those calls as being hybrid. Also, we fixed up some of the internals on the CCE. There was what's called a CCE management switch, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And we used it for good reason, but it turned out it confused a lot of people, and in the end, it may have even made the networking subsystem a little wonky. So we've fixed that, and so that's no longer an issue. So there's a number of people who are probably watching this broadcast that were kind of wondering about what that thing was and why we were doing it. So now we've gotten rid of it, and I'll talk about that. We made the self-monitoring and the resiliency stuff way better. Just way better. I mean, you'll see it's probably 2 to 3 times better than we had before. So this makes obviously the CC more fault tolerant and more survivable, and makes your phone system ultimately more available. We've disabled SSL 3.0. That's kind of an obvious thing. I'll talk about that. And we updated some of our commandlets. We added some new ones, and we changed some of the phrases and options to be consistent right? So we kind of had some kind of random stuff when we first did this. So we now have everything kind of consistent. So you can kind of look at this, and it's almost like CC is now an adult, right? You know, it's no longer the unpredictable teenager doing things that you're not quite sure of.
Yep.
We've got a level of maturity that's coming in, a level of big features that are coming in, and I'll go through all this in the next couple slides. But I do want to say that almost everything on here, remember, I would say everything on here was because of the feedback the people in the field and our customers and our TSPs and all the various people who interact with Cloud Connector have given us. And we spent a lot of time going through it, and this is a fairly sizable list of improvements that we've been able to bring in.
So we do want to say thank you for all of the customers who have given us that feedback, all the people who have used CCE, and it's really helped us shape the next version, 2.0 of this product. So we do want to thank you, and we also want to also continue to ask for feedback, I believe, into our next versions, because it will really help us as we move forward.
Yep.
And I think probably one of the most requested feature of all the features in this specific release is media bypass.
Yep.
And so it would be great just to know from you, Bill, is let us know what is media bypass, and how does it help a customer deploy.
Funny you should ask. I have a slide ready for that.
We're ready. Yeah.
So media bypass. The way media worked in CC originally is that the CC had to sit in the DMZ. I forget. There's another name for that, but in between the inner and outer firewall, typically called a DMZ. And it had to be there because the edge side of the CCE had to be able to see the internet, and the mediation server side of the CCE needed to be able to see the enterprise. And the only place where you can see both of those is the DMZ. So originally the CC was in the DMZ. Well, it still is, but because the mediation server was in the DMZ, all the media had to go through the inner firewall. So if I was calling you, my media would go from my desk through the inner firewall to the CCE, and then back through the inner firewall, and then to you, and vice versa. So you can imagine there's a lot of ports open, a lot of traffic going through the firewall, and the inner firewall is kind of like the last ring of defense. And so typically, people wanted less ports, less traffic. They wanted to keep an eye on it, and they wanted it to be fairly manageable. So without media bypass, that was really hard to do because you were just showering it with packets at a constant rate on a wide variety of ports. And so media bypass now allows media to go directly from me to you, or me to the telephone gateway or whatever, right? Yep. So that there's always traffic staying inside the enterprise network for the media, which is the bulk of the traffic for Skype for Business phone calls, because signaling is relatively small. So the goal is to eliminate the mediation server for any inbound or outbound PSTN calls from the flow, and to essentially improve latency, packet loss, and just potential failure points. So you can look at the slide on your screen, and there's like two kind of examples, and the one on the left is how it works without bypass, and the one on the right is how it works with bypass, right? So you'll see the media, in the case of the signaling, which is the green call flow, it's the same in both cases, right? Because we still have to talk directly to Office 365, and then the Cloud Connector has to talk to the gateway, and the edge servers involved and all this stuff. So all those components, all those call flows are identical with or without media bypass. So the orange arrows or packet flows are what's interesting. And on the left, you see that for me, the Skype for Business client, the user there in the lower left, for them to talk to that telephony gateway, or vice versa, for telephony gateway to talk to the user, the packets, the orange lines, have to go to the mediation server and the Cloud Connector, and they have to go back and forth. And you can see there's a lot of arrows there. Now, on the right, we show the same call with media bypass. And when the media is bypassed, you can see it goes directly from the client to the gateway. Now, obviously, the mediation server helps set this up with the SBC, and the client talks to the SBC, and they authenticate each other and all this. And there are clearly incidents or combinations where you don't bypass, and I'll get into that in a minute. But in this very simple example, you can see that there's a lot less arrows crossing the inner firewall. Now, the implications of that are not just security, they also mean that your CCE actually is capable of carrying more calls. Because it's doing a lot less. It's not having to move all these packets. The vast majority of packets, which are the streaming packets back and forth and all the audio, no longer touch it, right? So there's a significant reduction in, like, the Ethernet traffic and the inspection of all the packets and retransmitting them, all that stuff. Now, it's hard to say, and people are going to ask. I know they're going to ask in the Pulse, so
yeah.
I'm going to kind of answer it now.
Preempt it now.
I'm going to preempt it.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many additional calls you can take, because I don't know how many of your calls are going to bypass, and I'll get into that in a minute, because not every call will bypass, right? And there's no way you can predict. So you're going to have to turn it on and see how your calls tend to be and how many you get that bypass. You'll be able to look into that. And then you can kind of make a judgment call. I can carry 20% more calls than normal. But every company is going to be different. And so like I said, not every call bypasses, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about the considerations here, which are at the bottom. So first of all, you either turn bypass on or off for your tenant. You just turn it on or off, right? And so when it's on, it'll try to bypass. Now, if bypass fails, that is absolutely okay. If for whatever reason it can't set up the bypass, what happens is the call flow on the left.
Yep. So
the old call flow works.
Right.
So what we've always been doing, and everything, anyone who's already deployed CCE, if for whatever reason the bypass doesn't work, you just got what you got, right? Nothing has changed, right? It just remains how it is. But some of the clients can bypass and some can't. So right now the client, the only client that can bypass is the Windows client.
Okay.
The Mac client, the web client, the Android client, you name it, right? Those clients cannot bypass right now. Right now, the Windows client can, and the Windows client that can is strictly speaking this version you see here in red, and it's highlighted in red. It has to be newer. About, I think, 6 months ago, when we were starting all this work, we determined that there was some changes in how bypass was recognized and initiated that were unique to hybrid, because we always had bypass and on-prem. So the mechanism was there, but the ability to detect it had to be changed because of hybrid. So we had to go in the client, we had to change it, right? And these other clients that I talked about, frankly, they don't bypass even on-prem.
Right.
So when they add bypass, and they are going to add bypass, they will inherit it for this, and we won't need to do anything because the stuff we do in the CC is already done. So as the people who are responsible for the clients, like, modernize their clients and bring in bypass in general, it'll just come in for me as well as on-prem.
Okay.
But right now it's essentially the Windows client, and you should kind of
it needs to be that version.
That version or greater. You can get it out of any channel, current deferred or first release deferred, but it is the click to run client. Just to be clear. Okay. It's not the MSI client.
Got it. So if any customers are not on that client, they will need to upgrade.
If they want to bypass.
Yep.
If they're not on that client, it'll just work the way it did.
Right.
So there's no failure, right? So you should upgrade your CCEs, and opportunistically, as you start rolling new clients, these people will just inherit it, and the load on your CCE will go down, and like I said,
all the benefits that we
goodness
talked about
will accrue.
Yeah.
So one of the other reasons you wouldn't bypass, or would bypass, a distinguishing between whether you bypass or not, is whether the client is inside the enterprise network or outside the enterprise network. So if you are in a Starbucks, that's all, being Seattleites, of course, that's our go-to example of being out of the office. But if you're at a Starbucks or at your home office or whatever, and you're making a phone call or doing what you're doing on Skype for Business, you will never bypass.
Okay.
You don't bypass in that case. Because there's no benefit to it. Because you got to flow through the CC anyways, because you're coming from the outside, right? But if you are within the enterprise, you at least are capable of bypassing if you have the right client, right? And so the way we determine this is we have a web service that's running inside the CCE that allows us to determine whether the client that's contacting it is inside or outside the firewall, the external firewall. And if it's inside, we give it a proper bypass ID that is shared and configured with the gateways. And if it isn't, they don't get a bypass ID or they get an intentionally wrong one. And in all cases, not having a bypass ID or having the wrong one will guarantee you don't bypass. So you don't want bypass for external people.
Got it.
So again, depending how many clients you have external, how many you have internal, whether they have the right client or the wrong client, this all kind of affects whether bypass occurs. And so, as I said, it doesn't get nothing's worse than it was, but it can be conceptually much greater as if you get the right client, and as we roll out upgraded versions of the other clients. So I guess that's pretty much it.
Okay. And for customers, we've been running a tap as well, and just in general, was there anything that you saw and just kind of how customers were using this? To just talk about scenarios that.
I could talk about one. We thought we had a bug the other day from one of our system integrators, and it turned out it wasn't. In general, and this is not unique to hybrid, you should not run Skype for Business traffic through a VPN. There's a lot of reasons for this. I used to be responsible for VPN service in Windows networking, so I understand a lot about how they work. And VPNs and the deep packet inspection that tends to go on with them induce a lot of jitter and latency in the audio stream. And what you end up getting is just really, really bad audio quality, and it's a function of the VPN itself. For most traffic, it doesn't matter. For video, it doesn't matter because you can spool. For websites or email, doesn't matter. But for two-way audio, it matters a heck of a lot. And so, typically, what we tell people to do, and what IT managers tend to do, is they do what's called a split tunnel. And what a split tunnel is at the remote client, when you're outside the corporate, you run the traffic that needs the VPN through the VPN, and then you know the traffic that doesn't need the VPN, and you run it through the internet. So that's why it's called a split tunnel. Like some traffic goes through the VPN and some doesn't. And so the IT will configure your setup so that the Skype for Business traffic goes through the internet, and the Exchange and whatever else you're using on your VPN tunnel, your access to your Oracle accounting server or whatever it is, that all goes through the VPN. So when you do split tunneling, that's how it works. And in that case, of course, the split tunneling, because you're going through the open internet, you're outside the firewall, you will not bypass. But the point is you will still have good audio.
Right.
What was happening is we were getting bad audio. We thought we had a bug, and it turned out they didn't set up split tunneling. So that was an example of, it's not really unique to hybrid, but it's, again, one of these things that you sometimes forget, to be honest with you.
And it came up in the top. So that's definitely a good call out. Okay, so media bypass, great feature, very heavily requested by our customers, and hopefully that you guys can start trying it and give us your feedback. But CCE 2.0 is a lot more than just media bypass. There's other features.
It is,
and we want to talk about some of those other features. The next one being kind of the expansion of CCEs per site.
Sure.
So do you want to talk about that a little bit, Bill?
Yeah. So originally we limited the number, the concept of a CCE site, which is a group of CCEs that are kind of that users are kind of assigned to. We have what we call gateway affinity. We have users who kind of their traffic tends to go to any of the CCs in a CC site construct. It's not the same as a physical site. It has nothing to do with a building. You could have 5 CC sites in a wiring closet next to each other. But the CCs within a site operate kind of as a team, right? So that's the way to think about it. And also it affects the high availability. So typically we always, actually not typically, we always recommend that you do high availability and that you have what we call N+1 as a minimum, which means if you need 3 CCEs to carry your load in a site, you need 1 extra for high availability. So that would be 4, right? So, and if you needed 4, then you'd need 5. But in the old days, you couldn't do it because you could only do 4 total.
Right.
So that meant that the most CCs you could have within a site construct was 3, which meant that given our guidance on simultaneous call capacity, the most you could do was 1,500 calls, simultaneous calls, in a CC site. Now, what that means is that your overhead for HA is approximately 25%.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right.
1 out of 4.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
Now we've upped the ability, the number of CCs we can group together as a site, to work as a team, to 16. So that means that you can have 15 plus 1. Right? And I don't know what that is. It's approximately like 8%, or I don't know.
My math is not good enough.
Yeah, but my point is that it's actually more than 8. But anyways, it's a lot less, right? And so that kind of certainly on large installations, it makes a big difference. So, and this also kind of ends up meaning a lot to people who are doing what we call centralized CCE. So this is very common in Europe. I think I talked about it in our last broadcast, but whether I did or not, I'll talk about it again. Because there's a lot of countries obviously in Europe, and you don't want to do international calling. There's still international calling, even though the countries are fairly small from a distance point of view in some cases. You don't want like a CCE in every country, right? And so a lot of the big European multinationals, I'm not going to name names, but you can just pick one.
Yep.
They have offices usually in almost every European country.
Makes
right?
sense. Yep.
And sometimes not picking on Luxembourg, but say there's only 5 people in the Luxembourg office, right? It's relatively, from a population point of view, it's a relatively small country.
Yeah.
So in that case, it doesn't make sense to put a CCE in Luxembourg, or it's expensive, right? It's a server, somebody has to maintain it. Yep. It could go down. Somebody's got to get in a truck and go to Luxembourg and take care of it.
Yep.
And so this is not what people want. What they want is they want like all their CCEs in one place, and they'll put it in their corporate data center, or they'll rent data center space from somebody. It doesn't matter. But it'll all be in one place, and they're all shared, which means that I don't have to do an HA. Like in Luxembourg, I have a CCE plus 1. I have another CCE, so now I've got to deploy 2 CCEs because I want HA in Luxembourg. Now the HA aspect is shared because they're all coming back to one set of CCEs that act as a unit, right? And those central CCEs are now able to kind of share the capacity, share the HA load, and actually be a lot more cost effective. But again, media bypass also helps here. But I'll get to how all this works together.
Okay.
In the case of centralized CCE, we're now able to build a much bigger team of CCE servers to get you. I think I figured how many. It's way more than 1,500, so it's like 7,500 simultaneous calls or something like that.
Multiple times more than 1,500.
It's a lot, right? And so that is a big deal. Yeah. And so in any case, people who are doing centralized CC like it. Media bypass is actually super useful when you centralize your CCs as well. Media bypass allows you to at least keep the media in Luxembourg.
Right.
So the signaling goes back to these clustered CCs back at the home office, but after you've done the signaling and all the setup, the client bypasses to the local gateway, and the traffic stays hopefully in the building or within the campus,
local,
right? Or certainly within the country, right? And so that of course helps. So all these things kind of work together. Now I will say that sometimes on a centralized CCE, people put an SBC between the CCE and us for various accounting or whatever reasons, legacy system access. Media bypass will not work if there's a SBC inline between the CCE and the client. Okay. Again, the old media flows will still work, so your system still works, but media bypass needs the client to be able to directly talk to the CCE. So depending on how your centralized CCE is set up, you can media bypass that way, or there's other ways you can do it. But my point is that both media bypass and 16 CCEs per site kind of work together to make the centralized CCE concept little bit more robust,
Yeah.
affordable.
And that's I do want to say that's really cool that these two features combined together can really help our customers, especially in Europe, as you were mentioning.
We're deploying, I can't say, we're deploying a lot of these centralized large CCE systems in Europe right now.
Yeah.
It's frankly really on fire right now. I can
Right.
think of 4 or 5 companies that you'd recognize
That are doing that,
They're
yeah.
typically known by initials or things like that, and they're doing centralized CCE.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about that next feature,
Yep.
which is the ability to manipulate SIP headers.
Yeah, it's not a really sexy feature. Like
Yeah.
if you were to say that, like people aren't gonna tell their mother this is what they do for a living. You know, the guy who coded this. But
Yeah.
but the reality is that by being able to embed certain information in the SIP headers, it allows our customers to kind of analyze call flows and do billing and just kind of figure things out. Especially the SBCs can digest these things. And they can do either routing information based on it, or they can aggregate, like I said, some kind of billing tracking or stuff like that. So we'll start with the first one. So the first one is technically not a SIP header thing, but it's kind of lumped into this kind of class of features. So we have what's called a fast failover timer, and by default, it's on.
Mm-hmm.
And by default, it's 10 seconds. And what this says is that if the call setup doesn't occur within 10 seconds, the call has failed. Right. 99.99% of the time, this is right. I'm not going to name names, but there is a certain European cellular carrier that for some reason exceeds 10 seconds.
Okay.
Right. And so we were getting all these call failures, and it turns out they weren't failing. It was just like taking 12 seconds or something like that, which, again, I would argue is longer than it should, but I'm not going to argue.
Sure.
They're doing what they need to do. And so what we've made now is we've made the fast failover timer programmable, and so you can come in and make it longer, so you don't get these false failures. You know, I'm about ready to say the carrier's name, I got to stop.
Yeah,
but if you're using carrier X and carrier X takes 12 seconds to complete, you could set it to 13 or 14, or you could, and the downside of that, of course, is if it does fail, it just takes longer to fail, and people tend to get angrier the longer it takes for something to fail. But that's between you and carrier X.
Right.
So we're going to allow you to change that and fix it, and so that is one of the things we added.
Okay.
Forward call history is a way to, and we have some links here that you can kind of go to and check what that means. That's an IETF link right there, which is a kind of definition of the forward call history fields and what they mean. But basically, by default, we don't have it turned on. So we don't turn this on by default. But if you do turn it on, you're allowed to kind of track the history of the call, how it flows through the system, who referred it and forwarded it, and all this other stuff. And that gets in the SIP header. And again, as that SIP header travels through the system, whether it be to the gateway or to the SBC, you'll be able to kind of glean certain billing or routing information that you may or may not want to do based on where things came from. Now, forward PAI is kind of a legacy SBC way of doing the same thing. So they both do basically the same thing, which is allow you to kind of do billing and routing decisions based on how the call has gone through the system. They're duplicate. You wouldn't use both. But depending on your SBC and how old it is and blah, 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 you might use one or the other. So they're both achieving the same basic function.
Okay.
And so we have a link there at the bottom where we have a Microsoft link at the bottom of the screen here that shows you where you can go and learn about both of them and how Skype for Business works for it.
Okay, great. It looks like, not the most sexiest of features, but certainly something that our customers have been asking for.
Well, if you got thousands and thousands of calls per month, I mean,
Yep.
sometimes you really want to know, like, who's the chatty person, right? And so sometimes it's hidden when you're forwarding and calls are kind of flowing through the system. So this allows you to kind of reuse some of your existing SBC reporting mechanisms.
Okay. So probably very helpful for the system administrator.
Yep.
And another feature that looks like it's probably very helpful for the system administrator is self-monitoring.
Yes.
And so tell us more about that.
Well, so obviously, you know, your expectation is your phone system is like up all the time.
Yeah.
Like 5 nines, right? There's
Yep.
all this. We have an SLA, financially backed SLA, right? We want the system to be as resilient as possible. Now, part of the CCE is kind of uniquely vulnerable to some things because some components are in the cloud, some are on-prem. We don't have complete control of the on-prem. Weird things can happen on-prem that we don't see and we can't even tell you about because it's on your enterprise network and only you can see it. So there's definitely a risk that CC could become unstable,
Right.
just because the wide variety of things in the field that we just can't control. In the cloud, we control all the cloud deployments and all the configuration, all the setup. So inherently, we're going to have stability in those components. But when things kind of get out on their own and are out in kind of random enterprise networking situations, weird things can happen. And so in CC 1.4.2, I believe, certainly 1.4, maybe 0.1 or 0.2, I forget. We started putting some resiliency in there. We were detecting that certain things were running or they weren't running, and we would try to restart them and stuff like that. So that we already had. But now we've gone in and done a much better job. We've literally touched pretty much everything we can think of that might stop. And so if you go in there, for example, the first thing we're going to talk about is the CC corporate or internet virtual switches. So if you're not connected, within CC we have these virtual switches that allow the different components of CC to talk either toward the outside firewall, the internet side, or the inside firewall, the enterprise side. For random reasons, the networking problems or whatever, sometimes the VMs may disconnect. So we will monitor and make sure each VM is connected to both. And if for whatever reason they're not, we reconnect them.
Okay.
Right? So that is perfectly good behavior. If the VMs are stopped or saved, we're going to restart them.
Cool.
Now, there's a repercussion to this. A lot of times when people were tweaking their CCEs, they would just stop the VMs. You can't do that anymore because we're just going to keep restarting them. And I'm going to my money is on my software restarting faster than you can type. What you have to do now, if you want to stop your CC, is not to stop the VMs. You have to put it in maintenance mode and allow it to drain, and then it'll eventually get to a point where it's no longer running, which is frankly what you should be doing anyways. And
Right.
and if it is empty, like if you were going to just shut stuff down because you knew it was empty, then maintenance mode will happen right away. The draining is instantaneous because there's nobody on it. If there are people on it,
Yeah.
then you need
you need
to
to
give them a clean shutdown. So in any case, we completely restart the VMs, right? So please don't stop your VMs. If you need to do tweaky things to the CCE, use the maintenance mode. Okay.
Sounds good.
There's a whole bunch of services that kind of run in the background on the various components, and we have kind of extended all the things we monitor and restart in the background. So if you look at the next 3 bullet points of the services, the bolded ones are the ones we did in version 1.4. The green non-bolded ones are the ones we added, and we've basically doubled or tripled the number of services. And to be honest with you, I think it's almost every service there is.
Okay.
So this is a significant boost to the resiliency of what you're going to get out of CCE. And both the mediation server, the CMS, and the edge are all benefiting from this. In the case of CMS, we had no resiliency on the services before. Now we do. So that's all good.
Yeah.
So we also check to see if the inbound firewall is the rules are disabled for either the edge stuff. So if for whatever reason they become disabled, we're going to re-enable them. We're never going to allow this thing to run with the firewall rules disabled.
Okay.
Now, you can go in and change your firewall rules, but we're going to make sure the firewall rules are on.
Got it.
And that's just the way it is.
Okay.
So that's a kind of a big list of stuff. It's a lot of little things.
Yeah.
But I think you can see it is a lot of things.
Yeah.
And the result is that the system is really significantly more resilient and will stay up and operate and handle random events much better.
Yeah, and I think that really is the point to land with as you guys are thinking about what is this benefit is, and it also ties back to what you said in the beginning of how CC is growing up in version 2.0, but just that resiliency and the self-monitoring, it seems like these are just really key capabilities for a mission-critical hybrid PSTN
Absolutely.
solution. Yeah.
And there was a lot of work that went in it, and these, sometimes we internally we always call things like this like sideways innovation because you're not really adding like bullet points you put on the box back in the day when we shipped software in a box, right? This isn't going to show up on the box, but it shows up in something just working more, and often you don't get credit for the dogs that don't bark, right? and but in this case, we can say that it will be significantly more resilient. Now, if you weren't having failures anyways, and I hope you didn't, then this is just belt and suspenders.
Right.
So it doesn't hurt.
Fair enough. All right, let's go into probably the last feature we're going to talk about. Major category is the management experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there was an issue we had where we had all these roles and passwords and stuff like this, and CC needs to kind of authenticate itself using certain credentials, or certain people need to set it up. And so what we did originally was, I wouldn't say it was lazy, but it was the easier thing to do, which is just to use the tenant admin credentials, right? And so the problem with that is, like, if you're like a big company, like Microsoft, for example, your tenant admin credentials are like super secret and important because you've got 100,000 users that are being driven off of these credentials, and so you don't want to just like give this to every guy who's tweaking a CCE, right? Which is what we kind of required, right? Because and then every time you update them, which with credentials that important, you should be changing those pretty regularly.
Right.
Then you have to go out and make sure you update them on all the CCEs, and it was kind of crazy, and it was probably not a good idea. And so we got a lot of pushback on that from the field, from our customers, from the system integrators, from the TSPs, everybody. Everyone. It was
you got pushback from
it was a globally disliked requirement.
Okay.
And so what we now allow people to do is that you can just be the Skype for Business Administrator, which is kind of a sub role to the tenant administrator.
Okay.
So so that is definitely an improvement.
Got it.
Some people may not be happy even with that, right? But we have to have a set of credentials anyways. And so at this point, we've been able to rescope it to be the Skype for Business Administrator.
Okay.
Now, if you do change, now these are not synchronized, sadly. So if you change your credentials in the cloud, you need to go in and issue a commandlet to change them on the device. Now, this was always the case, so this is not changed. But it's a different set of credentials. It's the Skype for Business Administrator credentials. But like the tenant admin credentials on the prior release, if you change it globally up in the cloud, you got to change it manually in the CCs. And we haven't fixed that yet.
Okay.
But in any case, that's the improvement in the account we use to authenticate the CC. SSL version 3 is disabled. Frankly, Microsoft's been talking about this since October 2014. I don't know that we left it on purpose. I think we just forgot to turn it off, to be honest with you. But in either case, we're turning it off. Don't turn it on. SSL v3 is not secure, and there's a discussion of it on that web link if you want to do it.
Yep.
There's no reason this should happen. Certainly none of our software needs it, and you're not supposed to be loading your own software inside the CCE. So if our software doesn't use it, then you shouldn't need it on.
Right. So they'll still be secure.
Yeah. No. And we never used it.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, it was still on.
Yeah.
So it was one of these like house cleaning things. We went through and we do a security audit. And so we said, oh, this is still on. We got to turn this off. So we went in and turned it off, and all will be good.
Okay.
So the final thing is we updated some commandlet syntax, which again, not super sexy stuff, but we were using the renew verb in the PowerShell, and we should have been using the update verb. And what happens is you would get like, even though it would work, you'd get like an unsupported verb error. Which is like annoying. And so for whatever reason, they use the renew on some of the PowerShell commands, so we fixed that. So
Okay.
so the behavior hasn't changed on the commands that used renew. We've just changed the verb from renew to update.
Okay.
We have some new commandlets coming in that allow you to manage media bypass, right? And there's also a new command that allows you to import configuration changes to a CCE. Now this is actually somewhat important because sometimes you'll go through and you'll edit the INI file inside the CCE, and you either have to manually stop and start the VMs, which you can't really do anymore, or you have to reboot the system, which can take a while, right? So what we now have is the ability in a commandlet to re-import the INI file without having to restart the system.
Okay.
So that's a new commandlet that's coming through, and that'll be listed in our documentation. So that's the import configuration changes to CCE.
Wow. I gotta say, this is there's a lot of features that we covered here today as part of 2.0.
Yes, it is.
So you guys have been very busy, which is a great thing. I think the natural question that we'll get as part of this broadcast is, where do I get more information?
It's funny you should ask me that. I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
So so we have a blog post, and the blog link is here in blue on the screen. And so if you go there, we'll have both an overview of the CCE release, and just kind of a narrative text description of some of the stuff I've gone through here. We'll also have pointers to the new CC 2.0 TechNet documentation, which will go through some of the various complexities and what to worry about with passwords and all these other things that we've changed.
Okay.
It'll also point to the new Skype Operations Framework, or SOF training, technical training.
Okay.
So that will be ready for CC 2.0. And all that will be contained in the blog that's at that AKMS site.
SfB blog, yeah. So you guys who are listening today, go there. It's live right now. It is our general Skype for Business blog, but as you go through that blog, you'll see the blog entry for CCE 2.0. And so go there, and once you hit that blog post, as Bill mentioned, there will be links to all the additional resources that you can get through that blog. And so go check it out now.
Yep.
And definitely try. Now, before we end, and it's been a long, we've covered a lot of content, but the question that most came up in our last Skype for Business broadcast, maybe 5 to 7 times the same question.
I know.
Which is,
and I'm going to guess at this point with the Bing Pulse, it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So we want to know about coexistence, and so let's
again,
talk about that.
funny you should say that. What is next?
Okay.
Originally, 2.0 was going to have media bypass and coexistence, and for a variety of logistical reasons, things in the cloud, things not in the cloud, and stuff like this, it made sense to get media bypass out earlier. Coexistence required some changes in the cloud, which take a while to kind of vet and.
Can you actually explain, just in case, because we explained it last time, but just for those who didn't attend, what is coexistence, just really quickly?
Well, as it shows here on the screen, and I guess we're going to call it CC 2.1 because that's what we do.
Okay.
But basically allows you to put a CCE on the same network as an on-prem topology. And so in the past, we allowed people to do hybrid with the on-prem topology, kind of a split domain topology, where some of your users could be homed in the cloud, some were homed on-prem, and they were all sharing the on-prem telephony resources. Some people didn't like that because some people didn't want to further depend on the on-prem topology. What they wanted to do was to have this very small little thing like the CCE that allowed them to go to the cloud, and as they moved people over to it, the old topology just sat there the way it was, and eventually there was nobody on it, and you shut it down. Right? That's what people wanted to do.
Right.
And so we for a variety of reasons, it was difficult to put the CCE in parallel with it because the clients couldn't figure out which system to talk to.
Okay.
Is what it came down to. So now we solved that, and we had to do some changes to the edge, the Federation Edge specifically, for Skype for Business 2015, as well as a number of changes up in the cloud that will now allow us to allow a CCE to sit in parallel to a on-prem topology. Now, there is Skype for Business 2015, you're going to have to deploy CU6 on the Federation Edge. So that is one requirement for this to work. Also, if you're using Link 2013, We do support that, but you are going to have to deploy a Skype for Business 2015 Federation Edge, which is an approved topology, and it has to be the CU6 2015 Federation Edge. So just the Federation Edge is all you have to do. And if you do that, then coexistence will work for Link 2013. We are not supporting older releases. We're not supporting Link 2010. Not supporting OCS 2007 R2, right? We're not going to support any of that stuff. It's only Link 2013 and newer. So that's coming fall. We're about ready to start TAP in less than a month. So if people are eager, maybe on the blog we could put something about who they can contact for TAP. We're about ready to start that. We got a couple weeks left before we can start it, but we're getting close. So anyways, that's the next thing. So that's like the big thing that's coming. And so you'll see that in the fall. It's hard to be specific until we actually get it out there and we get feedback, because it is extremely complex. It's a lot of testing. All the different escalations. People in the two systems have to be able to call each other and transfer to this person and add somebody from that person to multiple calls, and meetings in one and meetings in the other. You can imagine the combinatorial complexity of the testing is really, really overwhelming. And so we expect to find a lot of things when we go into TAP that we didn't catch here, because it is literally almost incalculable, all the combinations you could have. So anyway, so the TAP may take a while. Like, I don't know. We get lucky. We've gotten lucky in some cases, right? Sometimes things go really well, and sometimes unexpectedly not. But it's all good. That's why we do a TAP, and we're there to uncover the bugs when we have a relatively small, focused audience, and not do it obviously in GA. So when we ship, and we should have shipped, we will ship actually, Skype for Business CC 2.0. Your auto update will automatically pick this up and install it. If you don't have auto update, manually do the update. It's important you do this. And again, I've said this before, and I'll say it 100 times. You need to auto update. So, or you need to manually update on a regular basis. If the CC gets out of sync with the cloud, you could conceptually have a problem.
Well, thank you guys very much. Wow, a lot of content. We filled the entire time with all the things that are new here for Cloud Connector Edition version 2.0. So we are super excited for you guys to go try it right now. Learn more about it. Go to that ak.ms link that we had in a previous slide. And we look forward to continue our engagement with you by answering your questions on Bing Pulse. So continue to do that. And if we get enough questions, we're going to go ahead and compile all those questions and just repost that back to the Skype for Business Tech Communities blog. And so we look forward to further engagement with you guys. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Skype for Business broadcast. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. So with that, Bill and I are signing off. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.